Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Responsive Teen Advisory Council. So happy that you're here with us today. And if you're here because you're interested in building relationships with teens and helping teens to be effective youth leaders, then you're in the right place. Because in this training, we're really going to dive into how to help youth leaders to build positive, meaningful relationships with each other, as well as with us as adults. Now, maybe when you looked at the title of this session, you saw Teen Advisory Council, and maybe you wondered what exactly is that? Well, a Teen Advisory Council, according to the David P. Weichert Center for Youth Program Quality, is a group of youth who take on genuine leadership roles to help an organization, school, or community group achieve its mission. And that group of young people, as a Teen Advisory Council, or short TAC, basically meets regularly to advise its community, to decide what special events to offer, or how to spend money, perhaps how to promote programs and activities, and more. So there are a lot of things that that group of youth leaders do to really meaningfully have a positive impact on the community. Now, maybe you have a teen advisory council that you work with, maybe not. Maybe you work with a student council or another youth leadership program. This information is going to benefit you in any of those circumstances. But essentially, through this session, you're going to be able to walk away with SEL based frameworks, routines that will help you to really empower the youth leaders that you work with. And you're also going to be able to help them through these frameworks to improve their communication skills and help them to create stronger connections with each other. By the way, if you're wondering who I am, my name is Anton. I'm the middle school professional development specialist at Primetime Palm Beach County. I've worked at Primetime for a little over 5 years, and I develop and deliver trainings focused on helping instructors, teachers, practitioners to really improve the quality of the work that they do with young people. In addition to that, I also coach and work firsthand personally with instructors. And then I also work with teen leaders, supporting the works of teen advisory councils throughout Palm Beach County. So very excited to be with each of you today and have an opportunity to share some of these best practices, this useful, valuable framework, an SEL-based framework that really helps young people to grow in their leadership skills. So I'm going to go ahead and share our PowerPoint presentation so you can follow right along with what we're going to be talking about. And as I said before, we're going to move pretty quickly through this information. So hang on. There are going to be some activities for you to do and opportunities for you to pause and reflect. So let's go ahead and take a look at first at our objectives for this session. So there are three objectives, three things that we're hoping you'll walk away with at the end of this session. Number one, you'll have an opportunity to participate in a responsive advisory meeting. You'll get to experience what a responsive advisory meeting is, and then see firsthand what it's like to participate. Number two, we hope you'll be able to examine and understand the steps involved in getting started with the responsive advisory meeting. When you go back to working with your young people, with your team leaders, how do you get a responsive advisory meeting started, and how do you run one effectively? And then finally, you'll have an opportunity to practice using a responsive advisory meeting plan. So you'll come up with a plan for a meeting and practice how you can target it to specifically address a teen advisory council meeting goal or purpose. And again, like we said, whether you have a teen advisory council or not, you'll be able to use this plan to help you in whatever leadership program you have to work with your teen leaders. So there are our objectives. Here's the agenda for this session. After we finish up our welcome, which we're doing now, we're going to get into understanding responsive advisory meetings, and then choosing a meeting purpose. And then finally, we'll get into our summary and closing. And again, we're going to move through these sections pretty quickly. Just a little bit of housekeeping. We encourage you to take some notes. There's going to be a lot of valuable information that maybe might stick out to you, and I encourage you to write that information down. And later on in this session, there are going to be opportunities for you to pause, reflect, and write down some takeaways. So please keep something close by that you can use to take notes. There are also three handouts that you should have access to go along with this session. And they are a life story, a responsive advisory meeting planning guide, and the student-led advisory plan. So if you need some time to download those or access those, feel free to pause this video, get those documents close by. If you need to print them out, you can do so as well. but we will be referring to those 3 documents during our session today. All right. Well, now that we've gone through our housekeeping, we know what the session's all about, let's do a little icebreaker. Let's do something just to kind of get ourselves ready for what we're going to learn and talk about today. This icebreaker is called Snap Wink. So let me explain to you how it's going to work. I'm going to stop the share so that you can see. All right. So for Snap Wink, what I'm going to do is every time I say Snap Wink, I'm going to encourage you to do the same thing you see me doing. So we're going to start by, when I say Snap Wink, you're going to snap your right finger and at the same time wink your left eye. So when I say Snap Wink, you'll snap your right finger and wink your left eye at the same time. Now, this is going to be a challenge, but we're going to see how we do with this. So Snap Wink, and you'll snap that right finger and wink your left eye. Then when I say Snap Wink again, you're going to switch and you're going to snap your left finger and wink your right eye. Snap Wink. So we're going to alternate between the right hand and the left eye and the left hand and the right eye. You still with me? So here's a little sample. So I'll say Snap Wink, Snap Wink. And then I'm going to keep repeating it, and you're going to see if you can switch eyes and fingers back and forth. Okay? Ready? Let's try this together. It's going to be challenging, but we're going to see how we do. All right? So when we're done, I'm going to say break, and that means that we're done. Okay? So let's count us in. 3. Remember, we're going to start with the right hand and the left eye. Okay? 3, 2, 1. Snap Wink. Snap Wink. Snap Wink. Good. Snap Wink. See if you can go faster. Snap Wink. Snap Wink. Try to go faster. Snap Wink. Snap Wink. Snap Wink. Snap Wink. Snap Wink. Break. All right. How did you do? I wish I could see everybody right now. Were you spazzing a little bit, trying to keep up with the hands and the eyes? Well, that's normal. Hope you had fun with this. This is actually an activity that really helps to get the brain fired up. Believe it or not, it gets the synapses and connections in the brain moving, and that can prepare our brains to take in additional learning. It kind of warms our brains up. So that's called Snap Wink. Great job, everybody, doing that little icebreaker together. Keep that one in your back pocket to use with the teens that you work with if you need a little icebreaker to kind of get them energized. All right, so let's go ahead and get back to our PowerPoint. And let's talk a little bit about what's in it for you in this session. What are you going to get out of this session? Because we know you're here because you're hoping to take something that's meaningful away, something that's valuable for you. So here's what's in it for you. You're going to learn how to empower youth leaders to improve their communication skills and create stronger connections with each other. And that's really the key. Improving their communication skills, their SEL skills, building the connections that as leaders they will need to be effective. And what are they going to get out of it? Well, any youth that you work with who are in leadership roles are going to have structured support to build positive, meaningful relationships, whether it's during meetings, teen advisory council meetings, leadership programs with one or more caring adult advisors, that would be each of you, and with their fellow youth leaders. So that's really going to help them as well. But in order for young people to really be effective, in order for them to really truly be useful in their leadership role, they really need caring adults to help provide the support to build their social and emotional skills and positive relationships. So when you think about our role in supporting young people to be effective leaders, we encourage you to take a moment to think about 2 questions. And after each question, I invite you to pause if you need some time and answer for yourself that question. And then if there are others with you, then go ahead and talk about your answer to those questions with maybe somebody to your left or to your right. So here's the first question for you. What qualities do you think a good leader needs in order to be effective? Feel free to pause the video, think about that question, and talk about it with somebody nearby. Here's the second question. What role do adults play in helping teens to develop these qualities? So when you think about an effective teen leader, what role do we as adults play in helping teens to develop the qualities they need to be successful? Again, feel free to pause the video and discuss. Think about that. Well, very good. We hope you've had an opportunity now to kind of process and think about those questions, because as we move into our training, again, this is going to provide you with a solid framework for building meaningful connections and developing respectful and trusting relationships among Teen Advisory Council or youth leader members. So let's go ahead and get into our first section, understanding responsive advisory meetings. Now, when we talk about a responsive advisory meeting, perhaps the first question you have is, what exactly is a responsive advisory meeting? Well, here's the official definition that's provided in the Responsive Advisory Meeting book. Now, this book, we'll talk about this a little bit later in the training, but it's developed by Responsive Classroom, or the Center for, or rather, it's part of the Responsive Classroom curriculum, and it's developed by the Center for Responsive Schools. And in this book, they provide a definition of what a responsive advisory meeting is. If you're familiar with morning and afternoon meetings, then you have an idea already about what responsive advisory meetings are about. But these are specific to middle schoolers, to older youth. And here's what it is. Here's the definition provided. It's a well-organized, purposeful meeting structure designed to provide students with opportunities to form strong relationships with trusted adults, to build healthy connections with each other, and to develop a good sense of community. So really, that's what a responsive advisory meeting is for. So when you're doing a responsive advisory meeting, when you're involved in one as part of your leadership program, this is the focus. This is what you're trying to accomplish, helping students to build strong relationships with you, with each other, build their SEL skills. So what does a responsive advisory meeting look like? Well, we're going to give you an opportunity now to kind of get a taste of how a responsive advisory meeting is run. So I'm going to go ahead and be the advisor, and let's pretend that you're all students. You're all youth leaders, and we're meeting for our session, maybe a council meeting. And we want to start our meeting by going through this responsive advisory meeting routine together. So let's go ahead and sample what that would be like. So the first thing we're going to do is I want to welcome each and every one of you individually to our meeting. And so welcome Hannah, welcome John, welcome Jamie, welcome Jack, welcome Belinda. Good to have you all with us. Let's go ahead as you're coming in and take a look at the announcement that we have up on the screen. So this is our announcement for our meeting today. So you'll see the information that we'll want to process for the next few minutes together as we prepare to meet. And please take a moment quietly, privately, just to read that announcement and then think about your answer to the prompt at the very end. So just think for a minute about how you would answer that prompt. Okay. And again, feel free to pause if you need a little bit more time to process. But again, the prompt, as you see, is think about what you would do if you had one more day in the weekend. Oh, one more day off. What would you do with that extra day? Now that everyone's had an opportunity to read our announcements, to process, to think about your answer to that prompt, let's get into our acknowledgements. Now, during our acknowledgement, you're going to have an opportunity to share your response to the prompt with someone else, or if you're by yourself, to just process and reflect on that for yourself. So we're going to do this as an around the circle hello. Now, if you're in a space with others and maybe you're social distance, well, what you can do is maybe turn to the person closest to you, maybe on your right or left, say hello to them, introduce yourself, and then go ahead and tell them your response. What would you do with one more day in the weekend? Then they can tell you their response, introduce themselves, and let you know what they would do with one more day. If you're in a virtual setting, maybe you have a bunch of different boxes or windows on some video conferencing app, then maybe take turns, talk to each other in the different boxes and the different windows, and talk to each other about what you would do with one more day in the week. And if you're by yourself, if you're individual, then just take this time to think about your answer to that question and really take this time for yourself to maybe envision yourself doing that, spending that extra day, taking that time for yourself, enjoying that. So take a moment now, feel free to pause the video if you need to, and go ahead and do your acknowledgement with one another. All right, let's now go ahead and move into our activity for our responsive advisory meeting today. Now, I'm going to direct you to the first handout that we mentioned. It's called Life Story. So if you look for your Life Story handout and pull that one out, what I'd like for you to do is, if you need to, you can pause the video for this activity, take maybe 5 minutes or so to work on your life story sheet, but you'll see on that sheet 6 different boxes. So what I'd encourage each of you to do is, in each box, go ahead and write in the following titles for each of those sections. For the first box, please write in as a title, favorite book character. For box number 2, write in musical group you want to spend a day with. Box number 3, a childhood memory. Box number 4, a person whom you really respect. Box 5, an activity you've never tried but would like to. And finally, box 6, an ideal job or career. Now, once you've put a title for each of those boxes, again, feel free to pause this video, take a few minutes to write into the box your personal response for each of those titles. What's your favorite book character, your favorite musical group, etc. And then after you've had an opportunity to write that in, then turn to someone to your right or left, maybe somebody different than who you spoke to earlier for the acknowledgement, and share with them number 6. Or if you like, one of the other ones. But take turns sharing with each other your response to one of those boxes. If you're by yourself, take this opportunity to really reflect on what you wrote down in your life story. And then think about the next time that you're interacting with somebody and you're trying to build a connection with them, maybe asking them what their favorite book character is, or if they could spend a day with a musical group, who would they want to spend it with? Or what's their ideal job or career? And if you find connections, things that you have in common with them, share that with them as well. Or maybe share with them your response to your life story. It's a really nice way to build a connection with others. So go ahead and take some time to pause now to do that, and we'll see you in a moment. All right. So now that you've had an opportunity to do the activity together, let's go ahead and end our responsive advisory meeting with a reflection question. When you think about those life stories, the acknowledgments about what you would do with one more day in the weekend, what are some things that we have in common, or you have in common with each other, based just on what we shared about our life stories today? Again, feel free to pause, take some time to reflect on that, or just think about that in your mind. What did you notice in common with the individuals that you shared your life story with, or the other instructors? And again, if you're by yourself, think about this in future. As you get to know others, what are some things that you find in common? Really, at the end of the day, we'll realize that when we do get to know each other, we may have many things in common that we didn't realize. And we'll be able to learn new things that perhaps we never thought about before, new perspectives that will help us to further enrich and further grow our experiences in life. So, thank you all very much for going through our responsive advisory meeting today, and we hope that you got an opportunity to get to know each other a little bit more. So there you go. That was an abbreviated responsive advisory meeting. How did it feel to do that activity? Did it feel like you were able to make some connections? Could you sense care? Could you sense relationship building? Could you feel like you were part of a community? Well, if so, that's good, because that's the purpose of a responsive advisory meeting. And think about how your teens would feel as they went through responsive advisory meetings regularly each time they gathered together as leaders. Before they got into their agenda or their topics, they took that time to build community, to build their relationships. That's really the point of a responsive advisory meeting. And typically a responsive advisory meeting would last about 15, 20 minutes. We just went through this quicker just for the sake of time for this session today. All right, well done, everyone. So let's go ahead and talk about the 4 components that you just went through in that responsive advisory meeting. Now, every responsive advisory meeting basically has the same 4 components. That's the arrival welcome, announcements, acknowledgements, and activity. And so the first thing we did was the arrival welcome. So that's where, I welcomed everyone, said, good to see you here. And it's important during that arrival welcome to be warm, to be inviting as you think about your students, to really help them to feel valued. And that's a time where you may, maybe depending on your circumstances, if you're in person, maybe you're socially distant or you're virtual, whatever the situation, some greeting that you could use with each of the students as they enter the space. So maybe it's a virtual air high five or fist bump or a virtual hug or air hug or whatever it is, but something that helps you to greet each student. And if you can, by name, saying hello to each student in the group, that's another way to, again, acknowledge each student as they come into the room. That's the arrival welcome. Then the next component we did was the announcements. And that's where you saw that I had something written on the slide with a little statement and a prompt for the group to think about. So that's what you would do for your announcement. Maybe there's something that they're going to be discussing as part of their teen advisory council meeting or student council meeting later on, or maybe just the latest information for them, or maybe just a message you want to share or a quote. And then after that, you give them a prompt, something to think about. Maybe it's a question, maybe it's a topic, or it could be a quote itself. And then you ask them to process that and then talk to each other about what they're seeing on the prompt. And that gets into the acknowledgments. The acknowledgement section is where the group, in small groups, maybe it's pairs, they're partnered up, or they're table groups, and they're really going to just respond to that prompt together. And it's an opportunity for them to get to know each other, say hello, check in, and then share their feelings and their thoughts. That's the acknowledgement section. And then we always end the responsive advisory meeting with an activity. And usually that's something engaging, something interesting. Maybe it connects to what they're going to be doing later as part of their council meeting. Maybe it just connects to the purpose, which we'll talk about later, of the responsive advisory council meeting. And maybe it's just for them to get to know each other for a little bit. Maybe it's an opportunity for them to energize. So the activity, the life story one that we did, was an opportunity for them to learn a little bit more about each other. So an activity is something that they're going to do maybe individually or in small groups, and then they'll share out their activity either with a large group or again in pairs. And after you finish the activity, it's always good to end your responsive advisory meeting with a reflection. And you saw we did that reflection question at the very end, and that really just provides space for all of the students to process what they learned, to make the connection to themselves, and then again to apply what they've learned to the work that they're going to be doing. So really, those are the components of a responsive advisory meeting broken down. All right, so you decide, okay, I get it. I know how the responsive advisory meeting works. How do I get started? What are my first steps? Well, let's talk about that briefly. Now, when you go to get started with the responsive advisory meeting, the first thing you need to do is figure out what's the purpose behind it. Why am I doing this responsive advisory meeting? What do I want to accomplish with this group of youth leaders that I'm working with? Right? Am I trying to help them academically with something? Am I trying to help them build community, build connection? Am I trying to re-energize them? Do I want them to really think about something that's happened recently in the community, etc.? So you want to figure out what the purpose of the responsive advisory meeting is. What are you trying to accomplish before you do that responsive advisory meeting with your group? Then the next thing you want to do is make sure you set the tone. And what we mean by this is it should be clear to the students that you care about them, that you value them. You want to create that safe space by the way you speak to them, by your words, by being empathetic, by being kind, by using affirming language. In other words, when you're talking to students, you're acknowledging good choices or decisions or thoughts that they made. I appreciate that you backed up what you said with evidence. Or, I appreciate the example that you gave when gave that response about the project that you're working on, et cetera. So you're affirming the choices that students are making, and you're looking for things that they're doing well and calling those things out. Another thing you want to do is use reinforcing language. And basically, that's reminding students of things that they learned before. So if they're trying to work on a challenging situation, you may ask a question, what's something that we can do if we get stuck in a challenge? And that allows them to think about something that you taught them earlier, that they've discussed as a group earlier. So that reminding language helps them. You're not telling them what to do, but you're asking the question to allow them to process that thought. Oh, yeah, that's right. Here's what we can do if we get stuck in this situation. And then always use open-ended questions wherever you can to encourage young people to express themselves, their feelings, their thoughts, instead of closed-ended questions or instead of telling them, do this, do that. So that's setting the tone where they can sense that you trust them and you're building your trust. right? Or their trust in you. The next thing you want to do is establish ground rules and procedures. It's really important for an effective responsive advisory meeting to have some ground rules, some expectations, and some familiar procedures that you go through regularly so that there is a safe space, so that the students know what's expected. They can get into a routine that feels comfortable. But those ground rules are important too, so that if there are any challenges that come up, the group knows exactly what's expected of them, the expectations. And it's really helpful if you have your leaders help develop those ground rules with you. Instead of just telling them the ground rules, it's really good if you do a session where they help you come up with what are the ground rules, what are the expectations for the way we'll behave in order to have an effective responsive advisory meeting, an effective teen advisory council meeting, an effective meeting for our youth leadership program. So have those ground rules, procedures, have them written down, have them somewhere clear, and again, get buy-in by having the leaders, the youth, help you come up with those ground rules. And then finally, you want to teach routines and signals. So what are the signals? What are the routines that you're going to use when you finish up with a section of your responsive advisory meeting, or when you need to get everyone's attention when they're in small groups and you want to bring the group back? Make sure that everyone understands what are the signals, maybe nonverbal, maybe their hand signals we'll use, maybe their auditory signals that you're going to use, but make sure the group knows ahead of time what those signals are. So when they hear them, they know, this is a cue for us to go ahead and get back together, get focused so that we can continue our discussion. Those are going to help you to have a much smoother responsive advisory meeting during your teen leadership program. All right, so we talked about a lot here. So let's go ahead and give you a moment to just pause and reflect on what we've discussed. So 2 questions again for you to think about. And again, after each question, feel free to pause the video, think about your answer, and talk about it with somebody else nearby. Again, if you're by yourself, then just take this time to process and think about your answer. Here's the first question. How would you describe the purpose of each of those 4 RAM components that we just talked about? Right? So the arrival welcome, the announcements, the acknowledgements, and the activity. What's the purpose of each of those 4 components? Feel free to pause the video and talk about that or think about that. Second question. How do each of these components contribute to helping teens build healthy connections with each other and to developing a good sense of community? So think for a moment about how they all work to build healthy connections and a sense of community. Feel free to pause and talk about that now. All right, well, wonderful. I'm sure that you really had an opportunity to think about each of these questions and the way that those components in a responsive advisory meeting, or RAM, connect to building connections and community for youth leaders. Well, it's time for a break. I've been talking for a little bit, so feel free to pause the video now and take a break if you need to, stretch, grab something to eat, whatever you need to do, and we'll see you back here in just a moment as we continue with our workshop. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We hope you had a refreshing break, and now you're ready to continue learning. So before we get into the next part of our session, let's just review a little bit of what we've talked about so far. Now, the very first step along the pathway to create a more socially and emotionally responsive Teen Advisory Council meeting or youth leadership program atmosphere is to understand what a responsive advisory meeting is and how it can help. And we did that. We took some time to examine the purpose and the benefits of responsive advisory meetings. And you also got to explore the specific steps involved in incorporating a responsive advisory meeting, or RAM, structure into a Teen Advisory Council meeting. So now that we've done that, we're going to move into our next session, or section rather. And I'm going to go ahead and start our PowerPoint again so that you can follow along with us. And we're going to talk a little bit about meeting purpose, choosing a meeting purpose. So in this section, we're really going to learn how to plan for a successful relationship-driven Teen Advisory Council meeting or youth leadership program, right? So again, whether you have a Teen Advisory Council or you're just working with a group of teen leaders, these steps are again going to really help you to engage those leaders and help them to build relationships with each other and with you. So let's talk about that. And again, we're going to look at how to choose a very specific RAM or responsive advisory meeting purpose to direct the focus of your meeting, right? So we talked about, remember, the very first step in getting started with a responsive advisory meeting was choosing a purpose. So we're going to dive a little deeper into how do I choose the right purpose to accomplish my needs or the needs of the group of youth for this particular meeting. So let's get into that. Now, the very first question that we want to think about and give you a little bit of time to reflect on is, why do you think it's important to plan in order to have a successful teen advisory council meeting? So if you're thinking about meeting with your youth leaders, they're about to engage in a project or an activity, something that's going to have a meaningful impact in their community or at the school or their program, why is it so important to plan before you start brainstorming or working with your youth leaders? Again, you can feel free to pause and think about your answer to that question. Here's a second question for you. How do you personally incorporate planning into your youth leadership program? So again, many of you may already have a program where you're working with young people, helping them to develop their leadership skills, the communication skills. And if you are working with young people in that capacity, what do you do to help plan for a successful program? If you're not, what do you think would be helpful in helping youth leaders to be successful when it comes to their meetings or when it comes to their leadership efforts? So take some time, if you need to, pause the video, think about that, and maybe share your response with somebody else if you're next to somebody else. All right, so now that you had a little bit of time to think about that, to process that question, let's talk about the 7 specific responsive advisory meeting purposes that are presented as part of the responsive advisory meeting framework or curriculum. And again, we're going to refer to the responsive advisory meeting book because it really gives a nice, clear breakdown of 7 particular purposes that you may choose from. Again, you may come up with something else that's not going to be included on the list that I'm going to share with you now, but these are 7 categories, you might say, or purposes that you can say, you know what, I want to go with this for my responsive advisory meeting today or this week or this month, whenever it is that you meet with your youth leaders, to kind of guide and direct the focus of our RAM, of our meeting. So let's talk about the 7 that are presented here. Here's the first purpose. Maybe you want to build student-to-student affiliation. You would choose this purpose if your goal is to help your youth leaders to build their relationships with each other, right? So really building community, getting to know one another. That's kind of like what we did with our sample responsive advisory meeting earlier in this session. It was really all about getting to know each other. You know, here's my life story, or here's what I do with another day in the weekend. So if that's your goal, is to help students to just get to know each other a little bit, bond, build connection, then you want to choose build student-to-student affiliation. And your purpose as an advisor in this is really to kind of step back, provide a framework to allow your leaders to really get to know each other a little bit more. The second purpose you might choose is supporting academic readiness. Of course, this might come into play if maybe there's some kind of academic component, or maybe something that you're doing in the classroom, whether it's in the school day or out of school time. But really, maybe you would choose this purpose if your goal is to help students to reflect on maybe a specific academic skill. Maybe there's going to be some test taking, or maybe it's some college prep or something that they're going to be doing related to academics. And so if this is your intent, if this is your purpose, then your RAM would really support helping students to prepare themselves mentally, socially, emotionally for some academic component. Number 3, strengthen advisor-advisee relationships. This is all about your relationship with your youth leaders. So the purpose of this type of RAM would be to really spend some time building trust between yourself and your students or the youth leaders. So it's making connections with them. It's doing activities where they get to know you, you get to know them, and you get to build a mutual trust with one another. That's really important, as we said before, for youth leaders to continue to develop effectively. It's important for them to feel supported by us as the adult advisors who are working with them. It's important for them to feel that we truly care about them, that we truly support them, and that we are truly not only advisors, but also advocates. You know, we're mentors, we're really there to help them. So that's the purpose of this type of meeting. Number 4, it might be that you want to develop communication and social skills, and this is specific. So maybe as you're working with a group of leaders, you really want to focus on a specific communication skill. Maybe it's their effective listening or effective speaking, right? Or maybe it's their ability to work in a group a small group processing things, critical thinking. Maybe it's assertiveness, responsibility. Maybe you want to help them build their empathy or their self-control. So it's a very specific social emotional skill that you're working with them to develop, or maybe their communication skills, presentation. So you would choose this purpose if that's what you want to accomplish during that responsive advisory meeting. Next, there's energize and re-engage. This one is a really nice one if your students have been just busy working on something, they've been working very hard, and they need a little break, they need to do something fun to re-energize themselves. So you would choose a RAM like this to just kind of do something fun. Maybe a lot of times there are icebreakers or brain breaks that are incorporated, some kind of fun, active activity for them to do that just engages them, energizes them after maybe a lot of deep thinking or processing. So very straightforward, but this is a topic you might choose if you really just want to have some fun and get their brains, activated and moving. Reflect and recalibrate. On the other end of the spectrum, maybe you want to process with the group something deep. Maybe something's happened in the news or current events, or they're going to be working on a specific activity or a social learning project or something like that. And you want them to really reflect on what they're going to do, start planning, think about it. Or they're reflecting on something they did previously and you want them to process, well, what did they learn from it? What are some takeaways? What would they do differently, etc. Or maybe you want to recalibrate, right? So that they're moving from one type of project to something entirely different. And now you want to just prepare them for this different mindset that they may be getting into. So that's what reflect and recalibrate is useful for. And then finally, the seventh purpose provided is to extend learning through themes. So really, this is kind of taking the interest that youth have. This is kind of, again, if it's maybe a service learning project they're doing, a community service activity, or maybe they're thinking about college or about careers or jobs, whatever their interests are, whatever it is that they're excited about, now you're using this purpose to connect what they're interested in to an opportunity for them to not only practice skills that will help them to meet their interests or to be successful, but also to continue building their relationships with each other and their SEL skills too. So extend learning through themes is going to be focused on a very specific theme or topic or subject that your youth leaders are interested in. So you would plan your RAM all around that particular theme. And there you have it. Those are the 7 responsive advisory meeting purposes that are provided as part of the responsive advisory curriculum. So again, just to highlight them, and I'll encourage you to write these down in your notes somewhere because we're going to be referring back to this a little bit later in our workshop. But again, build student-to-student affiliation, support academic readiness, strengthen advisor-advisee relationships, develop communication and social skills, engage and re-engage, reflect and recalibrate, or extend learning through themes. All right, so now let's do an activity together to give you an opportunity to think about those purposes and then to think about your specific youth leadership program or your efforts to work with teens and help them to become leaders. And we're going to do an activity called goal sorting. So for this, we'd like for you to, again, take out something to write some notes on. And first, think about 1 or 2 goals for a council meeting. So let's assume, for example, with your youth leadership program, you're going to have a meeting with your youth council or your teen advisory council, your leaders. They're going to have a meeting. Maybe you meet once a month or every couple of weeks, and they're getting together for their meeting. And as part of the agenda, as part of what you want to accomplish during the meeting, what are 1 or 2 goals that your youth leaders would have at that meeting? For example, maybe they're going to be meeting to choose a mission for their council. Maybe they're in the developing stages. You have a teen advisory council and they want to choose a mission. What is their purpose? What are they setting out to accomplish? Maybe that's the goal for the meetings, for them to come up with a mission statement that defines who they are as a council. Or maybe the focus is for them to do some planning around their agendas. So for the next few upcoming meetings, they want to plan out what are they going to be talking about? What's going to be on the agenda? What are their focal areas going to be? Maybe it's strategic planning for the coming year. Or maybe they're going to be planning an activity, a fundraiser, something they're going to be doing at your school or at your out of school time program, or something in the community. Maybe a service learning project that they're going to go out and do. Maybe it's beautification, or maybe it's something where they're doing cooking food and providing it to those in need. Whatever it is, there are a number of different purposes or goals that your youth leaders may have. So take a moment now to write down one or two specific goals that your youth leaders or your Teen Advisory Council group might have. You can go ahead and pause the video now and take a minute to write those down. Okay, so did you write them down? Hopefully you did. So now what I'd like for you to do is right next to the goals, maybe you had one or two, and maybe you had more and you were able to write down more than two. That's great. But right next to the goals that you wrote down, I'd like for you now to think back to the list of those 7 RAM purposes that we discussed just a moment ago, and write down next to each of the goals that you have on in your notes, which RAM purpose you think would best meet that council goal. So, for example, let's say that your goal was for your group to research or discuss an activity or a project, a service learning project. And maybe they decided as a council that they wanted to, do a public service announcement. Maybe they wanted to record a podcast or a video or something like that to really inform the community about some important need. So if that's the goal they have, which of the 7 RAM purposes that we just learned about, that we just went through, do you think would best help your Teen Advisory Council or your youth leaders to meet the goal for that meeting? Well, if their goal is maybe some kind of social project, it's an interest they have, it's something that they want to do, then perhaps the plan or meeting purpose that would be most suitable would be to extend learning through themes. Because if you recall, we've mentioned that that's the one you choose if your group has a specific interest, maybe a specific theme, something that they want to accomplish, and now you want to do a responsive advisory meeting that helps prepare them to do that. So if they want to now do a service learning project where, again, they're creating a public service announcement, then now that would be the purpose that you would choose for your RAM. It's going to be extending learning through themes. Now, as another example, let's say your group had a goal of choosing new officers, or maybe the goal was to figure out what qualities would make for an effective, advisor or president or secretary or whatever positions that you have as part of your council. Maybe they need to have a discussion about that. So you may choose to build peer-to-peer, right, relationships. You may want to have them to build their affiliation with each other so they can get to know their thoughts on that matter. So maybe you would choose build peer or student-to-student affiliation as your purpose. So look back to the list of those 7 RAM purposes that we talked about, and now take another couple of minutes to write which purpose you think would be best suited to the goal of your Teen Advisory Council or your leadership program. Go ahead and pause the video now if you need some extra time to do that, and then we'll talk a little bit more in just a moment. Okay, hopefully you were able to think of some goals as well as figure out a RAM purpose based on what we just discussed that could best meet each of those goals or help you to guide your teen advisory group or your youth leaders towards that goal. So now let's take an opportunity to move to another activity that will give you some time to come up with your own responsive advisory meeting plan to help you incorporate that purpose and meet the goal for your advisory council meeting. So let's talk about planning a RAM. So if you look back in your notes, just choose one of those goals that you wrote down. So maybe you wrote, again, 2 or 3, just choose one of them. If you only wrote one, perfect, choose that goal. And you should have a RAM purpose that you decided you think would be a good fit to help you meet that goal right next to it. So now thinking about that goal, thinking about that RAM purpose that you wrote down, here's what we're going to give you an opportunity to do. To start thinking about how to create your own responsive advisory meeting. And remember, as a reminder, we went through that one earlier and it had those 4 components, right? So we had the welcome, we had the announcements, the acknowledgements, and the activity. So you're going to now come up with your own welcome, announcement, acknowledgement, activity. That's going to be your responsive advisory meeting. I'm going to show you a template that you can use, and then take a few minutes now to fill out that template so that it, number 1, meets the goal you have for your youth leaders, and also incorporates the purpose you have for that responsive advisory meeting, whether it's building student-to-student affiliation or extending learning through themes or promoting academic readiness, etc. So let me stop sharing this and go ahead and show you the handout that you will be able to use for this activity. So if you find this handout, this is your responsive advisory meeting planning guide. What you can do on this handout now is go ahead and write in your purpose, your RAM purpose, one of the 7 purposes that you chose. Or again, maybe you thought of something that's not on that list and you've come up with your own purpose for the meeting. You could go ahead and put that in right here too. So type that in, write it in, and that's going to be the purpose for your RAM. Then now here are the 4 components of a responsive advisory meeting that we went over earlier. So what you can do is in each section, go ahead and fill out this planning guide, and you can type in, what are you going to do when the students arrive? How are you going to greet them? Right? So this will allow you to adapt it specifically to the needs of your group of youth leaders. So if you're virtual, then how you greet them may be very different than how you would greet them if you're in a shared space, right? If you're in person. So write that down. Where are you going to stand? What will you say and do? This just gives you an opportunity to visualize and be very specific about how you're going to facilitate your responsive advisory meeting. Then what are the announcements? What information do you need to share with your leadership group? Are there any specific events or upcoming activities or assignments, et cetera, that they need to be aware of as part of their leadership group or their council? You can share that there. And then how do you want them to interact with this message? Are you going to have a prompt at the very end, something for them to think about and discuss? You could write that prompt right in. What question would you ask the group to help them think about the activity that they're going to be doing later? Then the next section is the acknowledgements. And again, that's where they're going to get in small groups or pairs, and they're going to answer the prompt or talk about the prompt from here. And again, this is connected to whatever your purpose is. So you want to come up with something, an activity they're going to do, whether they're going to be meeting and greeting, whether they're going to be doing maybe a breakout room if you're virtual, or maybe they're going to be taking turns sharing out with the group, whatever it is. Are they going to be in small groups? Are they going to be with a partner? What's the format for their discussions? Are they going to pair up with multiple students, partner with one student for a couple minutes, then partner with another and do kind of a rotating partnership? Or is it just one student? You can be creative in terms of how they're going to share with each other their acknowledgements. And then finally, you'll put in the activity. What's a whole group activity? What's something they're going to do to help them, something interactive, something engaging that they can do to help them prepare for what they're going to be doing later as a council or as a leadership group. So you can go ahead and fill these out, plan that, and take some time now just to kind of get an idea of a specific RAM that you could use with your youth leaders. Feel free to pause now and go ahead and talk about that. All right, so hopefully you had an opportunity to at least start filling out your planning guide. And again, hopefully you were able to be very specific as you thought about those 4 components of the RAM. And then again, how each component will help you to get to your purpose and ultimately the goal of your council meeting or your leadership program. Very well, so now that we've had an opportunity to plan a RAM, let's go ahead and unpack what we've learned so far. So in this section, you've had an opportunity to think specifically about how to create a RAM plan, right? So you have your specific plan to meet a specific need during a teen advisory council meeting or during a leadership meeting. You also learn how to increase the effectiveness of your meetings, right? And we talked about that by making sure that you connect your goal to a specific purpose when it comes to your responsive advisory meetings. And then finally, you've practiced incorporating a responsive advisory meeting plan into a teen advisory council meeting based on the goal or purpose of that meeting. Well done. So now we're going to go ahead and wrap up our session together by reviewing all of the concepts that we've gone over. Can you believe it? We're already at that time. So let's go ahead and jump into our wrap up, and then we'll do an optimistic closer and reflection. So let's review what we've learned. First, we experienced a responsive advisory meeting. You get to see firsthand what it's like to go through a meeting. You learned what it is. You learn how it can help you to create a more socially and emotionally responsive teen advisory council meeting atmosphere. Then we examine the specific steps involved in getting started with a responsive advisory meeting. We also learn how to plan for a successful teen advisory council meeting. And we practiced identifying the connection between the various RAM plans and addressing specific Teen Advisory Council meeting goals and purposes. So we went over a lot. So with all that, I'd like for you to take a moment to do our optimistic closure or our closing reflection and think about, with everything we discussed, what's something you're curious about? In other words, as you think about all that we learned in this session, how would you complete one of these two sentences? I'm curious to learn more about blank. Or I'm curious about blank. Take a moment to think about what questions come up for you, what interests, what do you want to explore more as a result of our session today? Maybe you want to learn more about responsive advisory meetings. Or maybe you're curious about how this would work with your group of youth leaders. Or maybe you're curious about teen advisory councils and how to get started. So write down what your curiosity is. And I encourage you to do additional research, to explore, to see if you can find answers to those questions and continue learning about this topic of having a responsive leadership program that really helps your young people, helps youth leaders to grow in their capacity. Now, I want to share a resource with you that'll be helpful. I mentioned a few times through this training our responsive advisory meeting book. If you're interested in learning more about this book, it actually contains over 150 responsive advisory meeting plans that are pre-developed. So we looked at the template where you can come up with your own, but this book provides you with pre-made plans based on the 7 different purposes. So you can just choose a plan there that would work for your group. So this is a really nice curriculum that you could use as you incorporate responsive advisory meetings into your leadership program. So there's the website that you can go to learn more about that book and how to get a copy of it. And then another resource we'd like to share with you is Primetime's community of practice or professional learning community called The Zone. You can access that through our Facebook group. And if you do work with middle schoolers, if you work with teens, we encourage you to join the zone because we also provide information, additional resources to continue to help you to really find what's going to be the most effective way to continue to engage my teens, to continue to help them to develop their leadership skills. We also have additional training opportunities listed there that you can take advantage of. Additionally, training that goes into further depth in what we've talked about during this workshop. So we encourage you to take advantage of all these resources. And again, in summary, what did we learn during our session? Well, really the goal of this workshop or this session was to provide you with a framework and routines that will help youth leaders build valuable communication and social and emotional learning skills while cultivating positive, meaningful relationships with their peers and with each of us as adults. The result of all these efforts will be more focused, connected, fun, and effective council meetings. And here's something else. We mentioned one more resource, one more handout, and that's the student-led advisory template. So what we encourage you to do is as you get comfortable with running or leading, facilitating responsive advisory meetings, help your youth leaders to learn how to do that themselves. And you can use the youth-led template, that's the third handout that you have, to help them to come up with their own responsive advisory meeting plans, and eventually for them to take the lead in facilitating and leading responsive advisory meetings themselves. What a wonderful way to scaffold and help your youth leaders to continue to build the critical and important social and emotional learning skills they need to be effective and successful at whatever they set their minds to. So we want to thank you all for being here with us in our session. Hopefully it was beneficial for you. Hopefully you enjoyed yourselves. Again, my name is Anton, and we hope you enjoy the rest of our conference